All right, this video is called Storing Using Memory to Create Knowledge. Recall our three essential elements of learning: encoding, storing, and retrieving. So there isn't really memory, there are memories. There's places, different places in your mind that have different memories, different kinds of memories. And some memories are passive or pretty passive. At least you don't have conscious control over them. But it's going to be important to realize that the most important memories that you have, you can create. You can purposefully create memories that you can draw on later to put to use. And if you learn to do that, you're going to learn more and learn better. Otherwise, what's going to end up in your long-term memory and available for you to use is going to be by accident. And so we're going to actually try to take the bull by the horns and control that. So if your focus is on scoring, and remember we talked about learning versus scoring, if you're just trying to score, often you can do pretty well on assessments if you just pack your short-term memory. And I know when I was y'all's age, that's what I did, and that's what most of my friends did, and that's what an awful lot of private school kids do, and public school kids too. And it's kind of a losing game because you're spending all this time, you're just getting those grades, and almost all of that short-term knowledge is dissipating, and you're not going to have access to it later. You're just going to have to learn it again if it's important. So we're going to try to put things in long-term memory, and that's going to be one of the main points of this video. So there is this diagram we're going to come back to again and again. On the left, the world comes pouring in, and you don't have a lot of control over it on the front end, but then you do. And there's parts of the brain that we're going to talk about that can do a lot of work to eventually move things through over toward long-term memory way on the right. And then those could be drawn on and brought back into one's working life. And so we're going to come back to this picture again and again. So the first kind of memory is sensory memory, and it's more or less involuntary. It is just it's a very temporary, just fractions of a second. The world comes pouring in, like your body is feeling all sorts of stuff. And is it cold? Is it hot? Your mouth is tasting things. Your eyes are seeing things. Most of it you're not even aware of because the memories are so short that they don't and they aren't kept. They're just discarded and they're gone. But some of it moves on, and that process we're not going to get into in a huge way here. Not enough time. So the sensory memory is the second one from the left there, and we're going to move on. So working memory is the next as we move to the right. This is the sensory memories that are deemed important enough to keep. And they're brought into what's called working memory. And these memories can last between 10 to 30 seconds. So this is sort of a short-term memory. You could think of sensory memory as ultra short-term, and then there's working memory and short-term memories like 10 to 20, 10 to 20, 30 seconds. And then you've got that much time to either let them go or send them on and do stuff with them. Working memories connect what we just did with what we might do. And so this is how we incorporate uh, memories into each other and make decisions like, do we want to keep these? It's almost like if you're playing cards and you draw a card, and do you want to keep it in your hand or not? Or do you throw it back in the pile? And you've got about 10 to 30 seconds in working memory to see, hey, is this something that in the flow of my experience I should keep around to work with or not? And so working memory is that whole area in the middle. Um, and we're going to talk about those parts here in a second. So the central executive is sort of the symphony conductor, the traffic cop of memory. It's what allows you to focus on something, and like you're doing a math problem or you're trying to write a paper and you're really working on some analysis of a quotation or something, and you're bombarded, right, with all these sensory, your senses haven't stopped, so you're feeling hot and cold and bitter and sweet, and all these other memories about friends of yours, and a nagging assessment that you still have to study for later, and all that is just is trying to cloud your mind. And the central executive keeps that at bay. And for people who have ADHD, that's sort of, a problem for the central executive. And there's techniques and maybe medication that can help the central executive block out all of the noise that's trying to uh, break in and disturb it. And so the central executive makes decisions about where to send things. And do I send this bit of knowledge and this bit of memory forward into other places that we'll talk about, that will weave these memories, these working memories, into narratives and into sentences in the mind that will allow you to do something with them. So the central executive is the conductor there, third from the left. And we move on to another part of working memory, the phonological loop. And so when you are thinking about things, and you're thinking like about maybe volunteering in class, teachers asked a question, and you're making the decision as to whether you're going to raise your hand. Well, as you're sitting there deciding to raise your hand, you are putting things in your phonological loop. You're getting ready to say something. You're sort of rehearsing in your mind, semi-consciously or consciously, what you might say. And when that is coherent and seems powerful, then you'll probably raise your hand. And if you can't get anything coherent, then you probably won't. And so you're trying to put things in some sort of narrative, whether to answer a teacher's question or to think about your life and what career you might have, or what you might do later in the evening when you're done with your homework, or whatever. There's just all of these narratives, and all of these sentences, and that you're going to try to fill. And there's a lot of competitors for that space, and the central executive has to decide what goes into the phonological loop. So that's the top thing, the megaphone. I don't know if you guys even know what megaphones are, but it's the top one there in the middle. Um, and then so that's sort of the auditory part, and now there's the visuospatial sketchpad, and that's more the visual part. So like if you're studying a map for a history test, you can practice um, drawing that map, right? So let's say you're going to get some map on an assessment, and you're trying to learn that map, and you're like, can I draw this map from memory? Well, that's you putting stuff in the visual spatial sketchpad, and you are trying to put into a visual space different items that you have learned that are otherwise going to disappear from your short-term memory, and you're trying to capture them in a longer-term phenomenon by doing that work. And so just like when you take the time for the phonological loop to try to say things in your head, then and you do so, well, that sentence that you come up with can go into long-term memory. If you don't do that work, it can't. Just like if you don't study and take the time to try to draw the map yourself and put that in long-term memory so you can bring it back for your assessment or to know something about the world. uh, well, if you don't do that work, if you don't exercise your visuospatial sketchpad, then you don't get the long-term memory, and you're just relying on trying to draw on your short-term memory. So the visuospatial sketchpad is at the bottom there. So the episodic buffer is sort of the most important part of the working memory. And this is where everything comes together into real long-term memories, where you're thinking about, like, maybe you've got an important presentation to make or an important discussion to have with your parents or your girlfriend or your coach or whatever. So you're running through your mind and you're running through your memories, and you're making a movie out of what you want to convey. And you're making a movie out of what you want to remember. You're putting everything into a movie and discarding stuff that doesn't fit in that movie so that that movie can be put into long-term memory and drawn upon. So the episodic buffer is the second from the right. And then finally, the long-term memory is where you really want stuff to be, and that's, it's like the great safety deposit box in your mind, and it can last for a long time, years, decades. But the more that you bring stuff out of it and call it back up, the fresher it will stay, and the more access you'll have to it, and that's where the next part of learning we'll talk about is recall and retrieval. When you recall and retrieve things from long-term memory, you bring all these neural pathways into your experience, and you make all of that long-term memory accessible. And you can also go back and just make sure it's still intact and hasn't deteriorated. And so that's the library on the far right. So, practical takeaways, like, real studying and learning involves creating memories. Uh, it involves practicing with your visuospatial sketchpad and your phonological loop, and it involves the work of turning your experiences into memories through that episodic buffer. You're creating episodes of your own experience and of your possible future that can go into long-term memory. You can create those by doing that work, by asking yourself questions, by rehearsing, by trying out, what if I add this to the movie in my mind, or what if I take it out and put this memory in and this experience in. And if you do that work, you can create long-term memories. And that's what real studying is, toward real learning. But if you just go through the motions and you're just really relying on short-term memory, then you're not going to do any of that work. You're not going to do real studying, and you're not going to develop any long-term memories. And so, takeaways: recall the three essential elements of learning from slide 2. What is sensory memory and how long does it last? What is working memory? How long does it last? What does the central executive do? Uh, what does the episodic buffer do? Why is long-term memory so important? What are the main differences between cramming and really learning? How would you concisely explain to a friend the full process by which long-term memories are made? So attribution, if you want to know more about this, I drew on the great work of David Handel called Slow Reading is the New Deep Learning, and it's at the journal called Medium, and the website is here. It's a brilliant article.